Welcome to Conscious Eye, living in authentic connection and harmony with self, others, and the world. Featuring Ravi and Savitri.
All right. Well, good morning, Savitri.
Good morning, Ravi, and welcome. And today we're going to look back just a couple days because our calendar this morning was not exactly aligned with this particular event that is really critical. It's really important, and it's been around since 1970. So, we're going to spend our day today with whatever comes up as usual, but mainly focused on Earth Day.
That's exactly right. Earth Day, ecofeminism, the intersectionality of humans and the planet that we inhabit.
Mhm.
So anything could come up, and we'll see what does bubble up to the surface. So strap in and
There we go.
come on the ride with us. We'll just see
Right. We need the
what
seatbelts
comes
on
up.
because we're not sure which way
Right.
it's going to go. But we do have some interesting things that as we were talking before we got started today, showed up for us as we started really reflecting back on the years that Earth Day has been involved in our lives from 1970 until today, or it was Wednesday actually, the 22nd of April, which is the day. April 22nd is the day every year that Earth Day shows up. And the thing that we talked about before we started was really stuck with me in that we both felt that Earth Day, first of all, kind of snuck up on us, and then also just felt a little meh. I, Maybe that's an exaggeration, and I'm sure it wasn't happening for everyone. But I noticed when I looked that the media coverage was just not there this year. I mean, often it starts a week before Earth Day coming up, all the events, and people are interviewing others that are having celebrations, and they talk about the number of people that are happening and plant your trees and consider the climate and the environment and let's love Earth today. I was missing a lot of that.
Well, I believe that's because a lot of our lands, federal lands, are under attack right now. So there's not going to be a lot of messaging coming out about protecting the planet, saving the planet, you know, stewarding the planet for future generations because there's a lot they're trying to keep under the rug. So if you, I mean, anybody listening can check that out just by, Googling. You can see some pretty big corporations getting involved right now because they've been called on by the people to use their voice and their influence on these matters. So yeah, there's a big battle of that going on right now, and I know that you have some really interesting things maybe about that, but I want to circle back because I really had to do a little bit of learning on this. I didn't realize that it was founded in 1970 by U.S. Senator Gaylord Nelson, Democrat from Wisconsin.
Yes.
And it started as a teach-in. It drew 20 million Americans to protest industrial pollution. And I know we've talked on earlier episodes about what it really takes to sustain a movement, and
Hmm.
about 3.6% of the population have to be consistently and actively engaged. And that was 10% of the US's population at that time, 20 million, that were involved in that teach-in, or, and that protest, which I found fascinating because that's a pretty big, I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think of 10% of the population, that's what the voice of the collective can do.
Yes, and there was some place as I was looking through that they had mentioned that that was the largest or the greatest number of people that had been involved in protests, and it might even be to date. I mean, we're getting some numbers happening with some of the things that are going on now, but we're not at 20 million.
No. Well, it's growing. And when we get corporations involved, that's saying something.
Yes.
Another interesting thing I thought about Gaylord Nelson was that he was also involved in some other really important movements. He was a strong supporter of civil rights and civil liberties. He was an early outspoken opponent of the Vietnam War. I think that's important to note because I think what we can see in the political arena is that people start going along with something and they go along until it gets so bad and then they start to backpedal and it's like, hey, we kind of saw this a long time ago. So he was an early outspoken opponent of the Vietnam War. And he also called for a hearing on the safety of oral contraceptive pills. So an ally to the feminist movement. And he also attempted to overhaul how pharmaceuticals were marketed, making sure that their claims were true and accurate. Again, something is, so does this all sound kind of familiar? A
Absolutely.
little bit. Um,
Absolutely. Yes.
I
And we
I
look at
think,
what's going on today and how some of those things are being backed away from and um, halted or not funded. The
there, mhm.
EPA is a great example of that. It is going through defunding in so many different areas. I would have to say, well, we know I've said this a million times, but I'm going to go back in my history a little bit because in 1970 I was a young adult and I grew up in an area of the country that was highly industrialized. It was the steel companies were the thing. They supported the economy of much of that region and other regions of the country as well. And I won't point specifically to them because there were other industrial textile mills and the mining processes and all of those things were just utilized. They were just done with no thought or concern about um, where the waste products were going for that. And when I was a young child, prior to 1970, uh, my father was highly vested in, well, he was a fisherman, a trout fisherman, and we grew up in an area where the streams at that point should have been beautifully stocked and pristine. They were bright orange. Those streams and the rivers were orange.
Yeah,
That's
I
just
know.
one thing, not to mention how the air was. The air was also orange, but
Yeah.
it was so smoggy most of the time that it was difficult to be outside and really enjoy yourself. And there were some areas where we drove through that didn't matter what time of the day it was or what the weather was, we needed headlights to be able to see through the smog and through the debris that was in the particulates that were in the air. So, having grown up with that, and again, coming through that progress of women's rights and the civil rights and the Vietnam War, all of those times, and watching how we have moved in the last 50 years through and to a different way, and now seeing it coming back. Um, I would say that the time when I was young, before we had the streams cleaned up, which I have to say I'm very proud of my father. He was very important in rehabbing or recovering, reclaiming the quality of water in that particular area. At the same time, the thought was, well, they they weren't really realizing that they were causing. I mean, I'm sure they knew they were causing it, but as as particulates were out of the smokestacks and things were dumped into the water. And uh, there was a sense that it was not ever going to reach a tipping point where it would become a problem. And during that time that the senator brought that forward and wanted to have a day designated for the earth, that was a point where people all of a sudden realized we don't have any other place to put this excess stuff that comes out into the air, into the water, or into the earth. We've run out of landfill space and airfill space. And so it was like the perfect storm, as you mentioned, all of the things that he was involved in. It was the perfect storm for people to begin to wake up and bring awareness not only to the earth, but to some of the social issues that we were having at the same time, because it felt all related.
It is,
Mm-hmm.
um, I want to, so ecofeminism was coined, the term was coined in 1974.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned this, to me, prior to, uh, us working on this episode, but, by French feminist, I don't want to butcher her name, Francois de Bon.
Mm-hmm. Are you going to try the title of her book next? Let's do that.
I'm going to skip that
All
because I
right.
do. I thought you might have more to say on her work in particular, but just the ecofeminism is the connection between and the intersectionality of the exploitation of the earth, of nature,
Yes.
and the exploitation and oppression of women. And these are inextricably combined. They're really entwined. And the core ideas of ecofeminism are interconnectedness,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's amazing. Like you said, how they didn't see the connection. Oh, why are our waters orange once we put this steel factory up? I think a woman could have figured that out uh, pretty quickly. But
Mm-hmm.
ecofeminism, maybe that's a step too far, but I don't think so. So core ideas, interconnectedness, care versus control, which I think
Yes.
we've seen over the Industrial Revolution, during the Piscean Age, if we want to bring in that, that Kundalini, theory of time. Well, I can circle back to that, but care versus control. Um, and deconstructing systems of domination related to the patriarchy, capitalism, and extraction. But I really, was kind of focused in on the work of Vandana Shiva. I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she founded Navdanya,
Mm-hmm.
which is a movement to protect native seeds and promote organic farming.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she's really focused on food sovereignty, opposing corporate control of agricultural resources. But I think this ties into what you were saying is that I think, through the years, those in power, those in control have seen nature as a commodity and a resource to be exploited. I mean, that's the connection. And as you said, once they took action, we just were booming, unending growth, not sustainable in this industrial revolution. And we each reached the end of the road. Well, we don't know how to dispose of this waste. We don't know how
Mm-hmm.
to, um, we don't know where to go with this. We didn't quite think this through. We thought that it was going to be never ending. Can't we just take what we want all the time? A matriarchal lens does not think in that manner. It doesn't, that lens isn't colored in that way. Something that Vandana Shiva has said is resources that have been or are managed and are used by all members of communities that have been sustained or that have sustained people and cultures for centuries are now becoming privatized and commoditized by corporations seeking to maximize potential profits. And that's just in a nutshell exactly why we are where we are. um,
Yeah.
on
And
that level.
it's so interesting you mentioned the expendability of the places where we can dump things and just our excess, the side effects of production get placed in the habitat of Earth, which we happen to live in, by the way. It's our habitat as well. And we're having that still occur. There is a very large, even can be seen from satellite views, island of plastic in the Pacific Ocean.
Mhm.
And so the discovery of plastic also occurred in that time period. It was a little sooner than that, but it became really prevalent in the 60s and 70s. And again, no idea that it didn't decompose very well. People were used to using glass or some other, uh, maybe metal, something
Mhm.
that was longer term and didn't need to be disposed
Reusable,
of.
certainly.
Reusable, exactly. So, talking about the ecofeminism, which is really kind of an interesting concept, and something that you said just sparked another thing about that, is that that is how workers and people who have serviced our growth of the country, building the railroads, the plantations, all expendable resources from a certain perspective. And in addition to it being ecofeminism, it extends to a worldview of what's good for me is good for me, and whatever I can get, I will get, and no worries about what happens around the the event of me getting what I need to get. So it's a very me-centered experience. And one of the wake-up calls that we had was in the 1960s, and I don't have the exact date, although I should because it's on my bookshelf. Rachel Carson's book, and this book brought to mind the issues uh, of extinctions of our natural environment, plants and animals. And so that particular event really started giving us a wake up call about the circumstances that we're talking about having to do with there's no more room to just dump things. And the ecofeminism view was that women are of the earth, which thank you very much for that, we'll take that, but we're of the earth as reproductive entities. So it goes very deeply into the fact that because we are aligned with reproduction, there is a certain expendability around that and a hierarchical placement within a certain social structure. So there's a structural connection between the status of women, earth, and we can extend that to animals and workers. And so the hierarchy of our system becomes very aligned with our capitalist society, which Stefan talked about last week. And so coming into that connection, this is a direct deep dive into the philosophical underpinnings and the perspectives of individuals that um, maybe don't see that as a valuable way of thinking about things. It certainly does hold a need for accountability, which often people want to bypass in certain ways. But what we're also seeing is that there has been, in addition to you talking about the federal lands, um, a slow defunding of grants, of programs, of the research that was put in place to continue to monitor the health of the earth and to continue to monitor and regulate the um, the waste products that are being produced by our production needs. And I'm not one to say let's go back and not have any of the benefits from that. And most of us would say, yeah, let's try to keep those. So how do we find that balance, and how do we continue to hold space so that Earth can remain healthy, humans can remain healthy? We know our health has decreased. Our issues around cancer and some of the other things that are showing up are possibly, some studies would say yes, some would say no, associated with some of the waste products that are in our earth, in our water, in our air. So there's a regulation that was put in place over time as research came out with certain findings having to do with maybe too much of this, maybe too much of that. And then the regulations were put in place to help provide a cleaner expression of these side effects, these harmful things that were put into the earth. And we are now deregulating a lot of those things. So I look at that with a lot of sadness and concern, because having lived in a time when those things were not regulated at all, I know what that can bring. Yeah.
Well, to that point, another quote from Vandana Shiva is unfettered competition and profits are the engine of corporate globalization, while the people bear the brunt of the externalities created by
Mhm.
short-sighted, greed-based projects. I think that's exactly what you described.
In much
And
better words, thank you.
well, no,
Yes.
no, but I think it's, you that is, and what I'm hearing, it's like I get it from your perspective. It's like here we are again. What in the world is going on? What do we do? And I think, yeah, when we look at if you follow social media or if you're on social media and you're following, certain threads or certain algorithms, it can look so doom and gloom, but we have to
Mhm.
remember the cyclical nature of things and the power of nature to rejuvenate. That doesn't mean we're off the hook. I think you pointed to a couple of things. I'd like to circle back to that
Sure.
Kundalini
Yeah.
perspective now, where, because you mentioned, the hierarchy of, the nature of, where we're at here. And so we're seeing the symptoms of capitalism expressed through our environment.
Hmm.
And in the Piscean age was marked by hierarchy versus, where we're coming into an age of sovereignty, where we recognize that as individuals, we have the sovereignty to live our own lives, our own dharmic path. Isn't that why we're here, why we're talking about this? The Piscean age was based on, machines. It just the we saw the rise of the machines, the industrial era, it's still continuing with technology and AI, where we're really moving into an age of awareness. We can see that even with all this technology, without awareness, without consciousness, there's really nothing. And the Piscean age was all about the outer. We still see this going on today, with the people, we see these big figures in our world today still stuck in the Piscean way of being, like, let's go explore Mars. Let's destroy what we have here and just keep seeking, seeking, seeking outside of ourselves. And the path we're headed is to, going deeper to the inner world. That's where the true exploration is. Those are some foundational um, uh, you know, I guess aspects of the Piscean, our move from the Piscean to the Aquarian age, from a Kundalini perspective. But also what you were mentioning really does, it's almost like there's all this chaos, there's all this disorder, defunding, deregulation,
Mhm.
there's very much a lack of hope. Um, where do we go from here? And it reminds me, I was really wanting to cover this topic somehow, and I knew I would never find this podcast episode that was this came from. I was looking, I'm like, I'm not even going to look for it.
Mhm.
It's from years ago. I don't remember the name of it. It's never going to come up. And what comes up on my feed this morning, but that podcast episode. It's called Life in a Barrel. It's a Radio Lab episode from 2022 featuring Latif Nassar, Lulu Miller, and Matt Kielty. Heather Radke was also noted, but it really goes through the idea of how chaotic, what we believe, where do we come from, why are we here, what is our relationship with the world around us,
Mhm.
um, and they tell a story of this a German student who, through his studies, when he became a like let's say a dean, I don't know the term for it, but a dean at his college, where he was actually the boss of one of his former professors. And he went to visit his former professor in his classroom, and he saw this big blue like rain barrel, right?
Mhm.
And he recognized the barrel from a an experiment they had done, but this was 20 years later. He did this experiment in the classroom 20 years ago. So he was really curious, and he asked his professor, "Why do you still have this barrel?" Because what they did was they took a barrel, they took a big huge barrel of the Baltic Sea, which they're near, and and they left this main barrel as a control. And then in class, they manipulated, they took, think of the drop in the ocean in a drop, so they took each took a portion, and they kind of manipulated to see, well, what impact would they have on the living organisms within this water during this time in class. And here this barrel is 20 years later, and he asked why. And his professor said, well, the barrel sat after class, and a couple of professors came to him and were like, you got to get these barrels out of here. We got more, I got another class coming in. I got to do some experiments. And he was like, okay, well, surprise, the Berlin Wall fell. All kind, imagine regime change,
Mhm.
all kinds of structure changes at the university. That barrel sat for 6 months. So when things kind of settled down and got reorganized, this professor went back to the barrel, and he was going to dump it out to make room for the folks who needed the space. But he decided he would look at it one more time. And what he saw, he figured it would be dead. There would be no life. But what he saw was life was thriving. And in these tiny, minuscule, microscopic forms of life, he could observe their evolution in seconds, minutes, days, weeks.
Mhm.
So as he's looking, he starts to watch this water consistently, and the idea of how we evolved and came to be is either a line or a circle theory. Either, what would life look like if without human intervention? How would life evolve? Because, life, we think of how it evolved until humans got here, and then here we are.
Mhm.
So how would life evolve without human intervention? And the theories on that are either the line where, you know, there's some creature gets to a certain population level, and then another one will thin it out. And as they, go through this process again and again, everything balances out and everything continues on a pretty straight line, right? It's pretty balanced. The other theory is the circle of life, where something dominates and then falls. And so something else rises, and this process keeps repeating. We kind of see that if we look at if we think of the rise and fall of civilizations, or, the Roman empires is the word I'm
Mhm.
looking for.
Mhm.
So, but in the barrel case, what they found was neither of these were true. It was total chaos. It was just, you could not predict before for more than 15 to 30 days what would happen, and then it would just reset and it would be, oh well, we here we go again, let's observe. Now it was interesting because they did speak to Elise Beninka, who's a theoretical ecologist, and she did point out that chaos isn't necessarily whether something is random or not. It's a to what extent we can predict something will happen. And so chaos is highly predictable in the short term, but in the long term, it is highly unpredictable. We think, we can look 2 weeks out and we can see that the weather, what the weather is going to be, but beyond
Mhm.
that, we can't. So there's all this and there's this chaos and we can't predict life. And if we can't predict life, then what are we doing here? And so the presenters, Latif and Lulu, they start kind of bantering back and forth. Well, this is horrible. It's like, why are we here? And what is our purpose? And if we have no impact on nature, on ecology, on our environment, then why do we even try? I feel so hopeless about this, which I think many of us can be feeling right now. And we think it's so
Yeah.
big,
Yeah,
all of
because
those
I was
costs.
so emotional when I was talking about it. It's
Right.
difficult for me
Yes.
to be,
And
articulate the
as
ideas. Yeah.
as we should be, because we're watching our planet be threatened. I mean, it's our home and here we are. And so Latif is kind of in that space and Lulu is seeing it from a completely different perspective. And may I argue from a more eco-feminist perspective, although it wasn't particularly pointed out that way. And so Latif was trying to get her to, okay, so tell me, how does this circle of life story go for you? And she's like, and this is a direct quote from the episode. She's like, Simba, based on this work, as confirmed by Reinhardt, there is no delicate harmony awaiting you. And if you don't choose wisely and show respect to your fellow creatures and plants and bacteria and fungi, everything will die. The balance is not delicate. The balance is not there at all. And the song is not the circle of life. It's the giant abyss of no promises, vortex of life. And the point is, we are the ones responsible. It is our action or inaction that influences very directly or indirectly the world that we live in. So while we can look at it through the lens of hopelessness and despair, we can also look to heroes like Vandana Shiva who are doing amazing work throughout the world, across the globe, who recognize that if we can just look through the lens of the matriarchy, look through the lens of care, not control, look through the lens of nurturing, not exploitation, we can have a different outcome. We just have to stay vigilant and stay active. Remember, it takes 3.6% of the population to stop slow first to slow the encroachment of fascism, essentially, or if I can say, um, we look at this just in this one focal point, the takeover of federal lands that belong to us all. Um, and we can, if we just show up consistently, if just 3.6% of us show up, call, write consistently in whatever way we can slow that encroachment, we can stop it, and maybe we can even reverse it in some ways. That is the power of the collective. And in ecofeminism, there is room for all. So I think it's a very real possibility that we can do this. We just have to um, be consistent and be conscious of our consumption
Yes.
because it
Yes.
is so difficult to be conscious of that when it's pushed, it's Again, to tie this to the book I read, Feed, where everyone has a Neuralink implanted in their brain,
Mhm.
and the ads are running constantly. I notice as I flip through a certain social media platform recently, if I'm looking at videos, there's always an advertisement, always, always.
Always.
And am I going to click on that? Or am I going to cut back on my consumption of not only these products, but this vying for my conscious attention.
Hmm.
So, and maybe that's going off in a different direction, and I think we will head down that direction in future episodes. So, I think I've probably said enough on that vein of things. I just found that episode interestingly connected to this topic to get today, and I found it interesting that the universe was like, "Oh, hey, you know that information you were looking for? Here it is."
Yeah, and I'm so glad you found it and brought it forward because it adds a substantial context to the whole concept of Earth Day. And, we can bring it down to one single point of focus, and that's someone's worldview or perspective about their dharma and their karma, their desires.
Mhm.
And yeah, those two things, when they're infused in a certain way, aligned, someone takes on that perspective where everything becomes consumptive, much like Rahu, the North Node. It's all consuming, whatever is there, because there is no accountability. It just flows right through me. I enjoy it, and then it's gone. Uh, put it in the water, we don't see it anymore. Bury it in the land, we don't see it anymore. Blow it up into the air, well, it blows away because of the jet stream and other, currents that are on the earth. So we can thank Rachel Carson for her book Silent Spring and bringing that awareness. It was just an awareness, but people read that book and it made a difference. So as you mentioned, the percentage of individuals to be involved in any kind of advocacy and come forward with their voices in a way to create change. Uh, there are some silent ones as well, like her book, Silent Spring, that can awaken people to their voice and bring that forward. I was looking as you were talking through some of the history of Earth Day, and you mentioned that the original intention was to be a teach-in. Let's just teach people about what's happening with the Earth, and that um, that supplied a lot of Earth Day time for the first 10 to 15 years. But by the 20-year anniversary, they started realizing that um, people were aware now. They understood, but nothing was really happening in that way. So the research that had been done by several different organizations that sprung up to do research started looking at prioritizing. Of course, their own individual research was always the priority at the top of the list, but we got a nice list of things that could be addressed by Earth Day, and the teach-in then could include things like planting trees, ending plastics, climate in a general way, whatever that may be. The quality of food, we didn't even touch on that, but the use of herbicides and insecticides and the impact on the earth. And we're finding now, I just saw something somewhere and I don't have it to tell you exactly what it is, but there is in Oklahoma, there was a fusion in the air of an abundance of chemicals that caused a cloud that was coming across and was impacting people. So there are things that we thought are inert, they no longer have effect, that suddenly can come out of nowhere, so to speak, if we want to call it that, and show up for us. So climate change is a big one. And as the earth does regenerate, like you mentioned. And what came to mind was uh, the 9/11 event, when things were closed down, and COVID, when things were closed down. Certain things started to come back. And one thing that came to mind is the manatees started swimming in the canals and the channels in Florida again. And they were doing photo studies of the horizon in Los Angeles, and over time, how that cleared in a rather, we might say short period of time, a couple of years, but it was a difference. So we know the earth can heal. We just need to give it the time and space to do a little bit of that and manage how we put things into the earth's air and water.
Well, in and out and extract. This is an issue. I think something that really stuck with me in going through information for today is the relationship. So the planet mirrors our relationship to land, to body, and to each other.
Mhm.
And when you see, and I don't think that, again, I think there's an intersectionality with um patriarchal and matriarchal views and
Yes.
perspectives and ways of living. So, of course, a more matriarchal lens is going to pay attention to the cycles of the moon, the seasons, our own body's rhythms, whereas what we can see through the patriarchal lens of, this unending growth, capitalism, it's, we have to do these things at these times to eke out this much profit and this much gain.
You know, of course, being an astrologer, I wanted to take a look at the birth chart of the idea of Earth Day. So I went back to the first Earth Day of April 22nd. I went back to the actual time when they were having the meetings as well. But I think the thing that showed up for me was that April 22nd of 1970, there were some interesting things going on there. And there's a timeline that's involved with Vedic astrology called the Mahadasha, which is a movement through planets and timelines when different planets are particularly influential in a birth chart. There were some key points there that were very interesting. One is that the birth planet, Jupiter, being the teacher, the guru, bringing information and wisdom, was prominent at the time of the birth chart. And I looked at it from several different locations, from Wisconsin and from San Francisco, where it was first talked about. And then I also looked at it from two other locations, looking at the chakras of Earth, the heart chakra. So I looked at Glastonbury and I looked at Maui, because those are the two locations where the heart chakra, the anahata of Earth, are noted. So you can choose one or the other. The energies are similar. Some would say Maui is a little more accurate because the pulsation of the energy there is just about aligned exactly to the Schumann resonances of the Earth. So looking at that one as our source, the one thing that right away showed up for me is that Rahu and Ketu, the north nodes, are in the same location now as they were at the time of the birth of the idea, the very first Earth Day. Rahu and Satabisha, the 100 healers, the healing of herbals, the earth, the recognition of the dark and light energies that exist, and being able to encapsulate both of those to move forward. And K2 being in Maga, which is where K2 is now. And we have K2 bringing up past karma about the governance. Maga is the king. And K2 is the influencing planet, some would say the ruling planet of MAGA. And so it's been kind of a big deal for K2 to currently be in MAGA. And now I look at this and say, well, K2 was there in 1970 on August 22nd as well.
Surprise, surprise. Isn't that,
Exactly.
the fact that we look to anything but the map that was given to us since the beginning of time will never cease to amaze me.
Yeah. And the other thing that's really interesting as well is that Sun, Saturn, and Mercury were all within 10 degrees of each other in Aries, which Earth has a birth chart, and we look at the birth
Right.
chart for Earth is called the natural chart, is called that, or it's called the Earth chart, and it's where the ascendant is in Aries. And so, of course, that now, whether this was purposeful or not in 1970, maybe if they were looking at charts, that's where they chose the time when Sun and likely Mercury every year would be in Earth's first house. Second house is Venus and Mars together in 1970. Now that's interesting because that's the value system. And we have Venus, one his own house of and sign of Taurus, wanting to have things look good, be healed, be comfortable. It's our home. And Mars activating the energies around that. And they both were in the nakshatra Kritika, which is the one that brings independence and vibrancy and being able to cut away anything that no longer serves us. So there were a couple powerful things in the birth chart of Earth Day that there's more, but I could go on for an hour about the birth chart, but I just wanted to bring the highlights out. And looking at the Mahadasha, which is that timeline I mentioned of Earth and the lifetime, or at least the first 120 years of Earth Day, we still have some time to go. I mentioned that the birth time was in Jupiter's light, and with that, we knew that that first years of Jupiter were 16 years of education, of learning, of research, and understanding what is going on with the earth, how are we responsible, and what can we do to change it. And I mentioned the 20-year anniversary where they started talking about, okay, we've been in this for 20 years now. People have the information, they get it. What do we need to start for action? Well, the next timeline was Saturn's, where Saturn brings up the karma, brings up the circumstances, and takes us through for those 19 years of being accountable for what it is that has been done. Now we've moved into Mercury, and we're almost complete with Mercury's timeline for us. And from August of 24 until 11 November of 26, we're in Mercury Jupiter. So we're going through another learning curve. Here we are. And we're starting to look at the research. And what's happening is because of that, the perspective is shifting a little bit more away from Earth, and we've talked about that quite a bit this morning, and more toward deregulation, which in November of this year will be moving into Mercury Saturn, where once again we look at accountabilities. And will it be more deregulation, or are we going to back away from that and realize that that might be a mistake? That's yet to be seen. So I had to bring in a little bit of
Well,
astrology this morning because the patterns are the patterns and the planets are the
well,
planets, and they're here.
and I'm so glad you did because between now and November, are we going to use these energies to support us, to use our voice, to rise up, to do what we know we can do as the collective, to have an impact, to make a difference so that we can continue a more sustainable lifestyle. Now,
Yeah.
we're not going to solve all the world's problems in one go, but if you can write a letter or make a phone call or show up outside of an office or support organizations who are already organized in doing these things. Um,
Yes.
there's so many ways that we can be involved. And you know what? Even if you are, and I almost just said, oh, if you're only going to do this, but I should really say, and if anything you do, do this. Wait, is that the same thing?
In other words, try
Do this,
something on. Let's see what we can do.
do this in addition to anything else you do.
Mhm.
Um, um, Go out, spend some time in nature, make a
Mhm.
little altar somewhere. Put your feet on the ground. Go, put your eyes up toward the sky. Spend time walking slowly. And you don't have to go far to do this. Go to a park, go to a courtyard in your living complex, if that's what your setup is, or step out into your yard if you are privileged to have one. But go somewhere and just put your eyes and your feet and your hands, your just body in nature, and create a little altar. And maybe even think about revisiting that and, keep in the forefront of your mind the things that are important to you, because we all know, that our thoughts are our frequency. So, when we keep something in the forefront, opportunities may arise that we maybe could never have thought of on our own, where we could, give us an opportunity to be involved or to do something. So be just, a little bit tuned in so that you can see what's coming your way. And
Yes.
I want to point that out again, what you said, Savitri, between now and November, there's a lot of work to do.
There is.
Um,
Mhm.
and whether, whatever that looks like for you, let's keep this in the zeitgeist, in the conversation, because there are powers that be that very clearly don't want it addressed, don't want to be talking about it right now, don't want the spotlight on that. So it's our job to put the spotlight on that, to shine the light.
Yes. And we are nature. And so when we are what we call out in nature, we are just aligning ourselves and being in our home. And, the thought comes to me, we clean our houses wherever we live, apartments, or, if we happen to be traveling, we want a clean space to be in when we arrive in a hotel or another location. And we want a clean space in our own home. We have to remember that our home is not just the buildings that we're in. It encompasses the entire planet. And I have to say that there are over 150 countries now that celebrate Earth Day. So I know you and I focused on what was happening in the United States and the point of origin for all of this, but it's now a global celebration. And they were talking about some of the progress that was, have been made in areas of the world that had like deforestation in South America and India. In those areas, they're planting and have planted over 2 million trees in this duration. Now, that may not seem like a lot when we think about the time frame from 1970 to today, but that's something to really celebrate. And if we plant a tree, everybody in the United States, think of how that could be. Or each family uses trees as a celebratory event, like for birthdays and other events. That will go a
Or
long way.
make a commitment to buy local,
Mhm. Right.
go towards, your local small businesses, buy less, really pay attention to what you're consuming.
Mhm.
I found myself getting, we can get caught up into the capitalist machine. We've got Temu, we've got Amazon, we've got Alibaba Express. We've got you can order something today and a huge ball of crap will be on your porch tomorrow. You know, it's about what we can stop doing as much as what we can start doing as well. So, you know, what's one little thing that you can change? And again, not that those things are going to be the solution, but it keeps it on the forefront of the mind. And what we need to continue to ask and keep using our voices and using our wallets to tell the powers that be that this is not okay, that we demand better stewardship of our resources. And if you're not going to be a good steward of those resources, you're not going to be leading us. So that's the message that we can control
Yes.
um, through
And
our everyday
listen,
decisions.
one thing, take care of our little friends, the pollinators. They are a
Absolutely.
special
So,
interest of mine, so I will put that out there as well.
yeah, find a ritual that keeps you connected. It's easy to get pulled out of the body and into the head when, where it's the capitalist machine. You got to get up, you got to go to work, you have to plan all these things, you got to take care of the kids. Oh, I forgot about their birthday party. I have to make cupcakes. Oh, I should have planted a tree. No, whatever it is, we get so busy. It can be so easy to be pulled out of our bodies. So let's, come back into grounding. When we ground into our bodies, we ground into the earth, we become, we realize, we remember the interconnectedness of all. So I
Yes.
invite all of our listeners to find a ritual to connect with yourself
Hmm.
and your earth. And we thank you all for being here today. We went on quite a bit on that, but it was, it wasn't talked about in the zeitgeist out there. So wanted to bring a little bit of attention on that because it's not just a day. It's kind of important to us. One last quote from Vandana Shiva. She says, "In
Hmm.
nature's economy, maybe I already said this, but in nature's economy, the currency is not money, it's life." So
That is
we're
the
really
truth.
at that critical point, and we really need to remember that. So
Yeah. And then stay tuned next week. We'll be looking at May Day, the full moon in Beltane. And the following week, we'll be maybe swinging back to some of this briefly, but our main focus will be Mother's Day. So I wanted to give you a heads up on what's coming up in the future. And thank you for being with us today.
yes, thank you so much. Like, share, subscribe, and comment, and we'll see you next time. Satnam.
Namaste.